Tradition holds that an Indian village once occupied the heights above the falls. While positive proof is not available, it is certain that the area, as well as the area in what is now Irvine Park, was a favorite camping ground for Indian hunting parties. The first permanent white settlement began in 1836 when Louis de Marie and his family built a cabin on the south side of the river at the falls. Jean Brunet led a crew of men who built the first sawmill at this very inappropriate spot on the Chippewa River. Later men were to say that if Brunet had been looking for the worst possible spot to build a mill, he could not have found one less well suited for the purpose. Time and again, this mill and dam were taken out by flood and the logs lost. The early history of the area was dominated by white pines and sawmills. The most important mill was the one at Chippewa Falls, which eventually grew into the largest mill in the world under one roof. The settlement at the falls grew around the mill. Home to the early settlers was a collection of connecting one-story buildings known as Battle Row. It was situated under the bluff in the area just north of the present Court Street. On the bluff, the first Catholic church was constructed in 1856. It was a small building, 16 by 18 feet, raised in a few days in a bee. The carpenter's bench served as the altar. The church was known as St. Mary's of the Falls or Our Lady of the Pines. Father Charles Francis Xavier Goldsmith arrived in 1869 to assume the post of pastor of St. Mary's and immediately began planning for the new Notre Dame Church. Construction started in 1870. Stone for the building was hauled from McGurk and McLargy's quarry in what is now Irvine Park. The church was completed in 1872. The center of activity in early Chippewa Falls was River Street. There are a number of pictures of the thoroughfare taken from the hill near Notre Dame. After the fire of 1869, which destroyed an entire block bounded by Central, Bay, Spring, and Bridge Streets, both sides of which were burned, the rebuilding began to stretch north. The courthouse was originally planned to be built in the area called Courthouse Square next to Notre Dame Church. However, county offices were housed temporarily in the rooms above H.S. Allen's carpenter shop. The first courthouse was on Spring Street in the old Pine Tree House. In 1873, the Allen family donated a new courthouse square, and the courthouse was erected there, on North Bridge Street. The county jail was built in 1875 on Spruce Street, across from the courthouse. Terrace Place, built in 1873 at the corner of Cedar and Bridge Streets, was the residence of such prominent citizens as George Winans, William Carson, Thaddeus C. Pound, and William Irvine. It ended its days as Mrs. Patton's boarding house. The residence was demolished to make way for the new Chippewa Falls High School, which was built in 1906. The focus of local business and shops gradually switched from River Street, which had the mill, the offices of the Mississippi River Logging Company, and the railroad. Progressing north from the river, the town gradually replaced what had been a cedar swamp. Hook's Hall, the first real theater with stage, curtains, and scenery, was built in the early 1870s on Lower Bridge Street. As early as 1872, traveling troops advertised their coming. The First National Bank appeared in 1873. Its rather grandiose front was added in 1898. During the 1880s, the high school was located on Bay Street, at the corner of Bay Street and Grand Avenue. The old Island Street School is seen here in the background. High water was much in evidence in this 1897 view of Spring Street. The St. John Society, in full regalia, marched from their building at 515 North Bridge Street to Notre Dame Church on national and church holidays as they are seen here on St. John's Day, 1897. The portion of Bridge Street from 213 North on the alley to the intersection with Grand Avenue, which was originally known as Mill Street, was occupied by the same structures from at least the 1880s. 213 North Bridge Street was occupied by M.A. Phillips Bookstore in 1893. 219 was R.D. Whitmore's in 1889. 221 had Whitmore's Harness Shop. And in 1890, 223 was Pierce and Brewster's. In this 1900 view of Central Street, the Marshall Building, now Kelly Furniture, is visible in the distance. P. L. McQuillan Company, Heating and Plumbing, hauled a Kewanee smokeless boiler down Spring Street in 1922. The corner now occupied by the J.C. Penney Company was the home of McCarthy's Liquor Store, Hanson Drug, and Krause's Cafe in 1925. Many cars lined Bridge Street in 1926, and the streetcar tracks are visible. This 1927 picture shows the same block from the opposite direction. Ornate facades were featured on a number of buildings in early Chippewa Falls. The old top of the J.W. Mason Building, now Manor Interiors, is a good example. The early years of the 20th century saw many changes in the face of the city. The Carnegie Library was dedicated and opened in 1902. Prominent in business then and instrumental in achieving the grant from the Andrew Carnegie for the library was Leslie Wilson, whose home on Superior Street, shown as it appeared about 1920, is now the Wilson House Bed and Breakfast. The Progressive League, forerunner of the Chamber of Commerce, was successful in bringing the sugar beet factory in 1904. Located in what was known as the company pasture west on River Street, the site is now occupied by the Bayesian Oil Company. Other early businesses were the Furniture Factory and the Chair Factory, both appearing about 1907. On Duncan Creek, and of older vintage, were the flour and grist mills, Cale's Mill, and the Star Mill and Consolidated Milling. And the oldest industry in Chippewa Falls, founded in 1867, the Spring Brewery, which later became known as the Leinenkugel Brewery, seen here as it appeared about 1910. The first hospital in the city was St. Luke's, located on the corner of Huron and Macomber Streets. It opened on December 22, 1882. The second and longest-running hospital opened in a house on the corner of Spring and Rural Streets on June 28, 1885. From its first home, it was moved to the Edward Rutledge property on Pearl Street. Mr. Rutledge had purchased the old Bingham residence on Grand Avenue, and his old home became St. Joseph's Hospital. The house was moved across the street, kitty corner from the St. Charles Church, and the first portion of St. Joseph's new hospital was constructed in its place. Over the years, a number of additions were made so that by 1928, the building that had started at the corner of Spruce and Pearl Streets now extended along Pearl to Cedar Street. The Northwestern Hospital was opened in 1907 in the old Chichester residence at 407 West Central Street. The Emergency Hospital and Mud Baths Sanatorium, 808 Jefferson Avenue, was incorporated in 1933. When the Great Pine Forest dwindled to acres of stumps, Chippewa Falls needed new industries to support it. The business which had been quietly maintaining the welfare of the lumbermen's feet with boots began to emerge from the many small shops where boots and shoes were made by hand to the large factories which helped put the slogan, "Made in Chippewa," before the national eye. Among the large factories which were built after the turn of the century were the C. Gotzian Company on Duncan Street, now Rushman Drive. It was built to house the Harshman Shoe Company in 1902. The building later became the home of the Mason Shoe Company when the company moved from its original plant at 412 to 417 North Bridge Street, the present site of the First National Bank. The Handmade Shoe Company's building, destroyed in the flood of 1934 on Duncan Creek. The Chippewa Shoe Manufacturing Company's new building at the corner of Bay and River Streets went up in 1910. Sometime after 1904, and before the big mill was dismantled in 1915, a panoramic view of the area on the Chippewa River was shot from the top of the mill. The identifiable landmarks give an interesting glimpse of the growth of Chippewa Falls. Beginning with a view of the river and railroad bridges east of the mill, the piers, resembling fish cribs, are clearly visible as you look upstream. Moving towards the south, the wintry landscape shows a sparsely populated south side with the old Omaha Depot. Swinging westward, Holy Ghost Church, in the upper left of the picture, seems to be in a lonely spot. Looking directly west, downstream, the old wagon bridge on Main Street ends on the north side at Taylor Street. Behind the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad Bridge, the smokestack of the sugar beet factory is just visible. The view to the north has many landmarks. The original Chippewa Valley Mercantile building, erected in 1904, it was destroyed by fire in 1916 and rebuilt in the same location. The Carnegie Library, a 1902 building, the office of the Chippewa Lumber and Boom Company, and the old wooden footbridge across Duncan Creek on River Street, among many others. The circle ends facing northeast with one of the most visible landmarks in Chippewa Falls, Notre Dame Church. Court Street looks much different now. For people seeking a tourist camp and Irvine Park, in 1926, the sign on the lamp post at the corner of Bridge and Columbia Streets in front of the then 10-year-old Edward Rutledge Charities building pointed a finger and proclaimed, "Follow car tracks." The electric railway line went to the turnaround at the Irvine Park station. Arriving in the park, they would find the 2-year-old bandstand, paid for by William Irvine, dedicated to our soldiers and sailors. Its tourist campsite had picnic tables and room for their touring cars and plenty of space to pitch a tent. Spectator sports were in vogue in the early days too. Baseball has been at the Falls from as early as 1867, when a team was organized. By that standard, this 1910 Chippewa Falls team and Andy Porter's 1912 team were very late comers. Harness racing at the fairgrounds was long a favorite. This 1910 picture shows the old grandstand and racetrack. Harness races were always a popular feature at the Northern Wisconsin State Fair. With the approach of Chippewa's centennial year, the Chippewa Falls Senior High School worked hard to make their 1936 yearbook a special edition. It turned out to be the sole observance of the actual historical date of the first permanent white settlement. Due to various delays and late starts, the centennial celebration came a year late, in 1937. It was called, rather grandly, a Chippewa Valley Centennial and Homecoming Exposition, and was celebrated with the usual beard-growing contests, costumes, and festivities. Webster defines glimpse as a brief, fleeting view. This glimpse of things that were has necessarily left out many interesting and intriguing things. May it inspire you to search for and to preserve those brief, fleeting views of things that may be near you.